whether it's kind of train times between destinations all the way through to Kit Kat flavours, as I've already touched on. Always happy to share my kind of enthusiasm and insights. So Inside Japan Tours are 2 multi-award-winning brands. We are a specialist tour operator, and we're united by the same commitment, which is to create outstanding customer experience from the first time you contact us all the way through to when you travel and return home. We're really happy. On Friday we were at an awards show in London and we won Best Luxury Tour Operator of the Year, which is very exciting. So I got to go up on stage and win an award, which is very, very thrilling. But it's just testament to the level of customer service that we offer for our trips. So you have to ignore the terribly placed geography of this map, but just to try and fit it all in. But these are the destinations that we offer beyond Japan. So we've got Japan and South Korea, we've got Borneo, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Lots of these work really well as standalone destinations, but we can mix and match between the two. So for example, Japan and South Korea work really well together. You're able to kind of either fly between the two or take a ferry between the two, so you are able to combine more countries within one trip. So as a company, we are B Corp certified and we specialise in cultural adventure. So what we mean by cultural adventure is kind of pairing some classic sightseeing with a slice of everyday local life. So we don't want you to just go to Tokyo and see the sights that everybody else is seeing. We want you to go there and kind of really immerse yourself in the destination, in the culture, whether that's a street food tour or kind of taking a guide, taking a tour with one of our insiders to learn a little bit more about some of the less visited shrines and temples, so that you can really get the full experience. So we do pride ourselves on being local experts. Our travel consultants and our product team have all lived and worked and travelled extensively in Japan. I myself spent 2 years living in Japan and teaching English, and that's just a fraction of time compared to some of my colleagues who spent sort of 5-6 years there, have been kind of going back once or twice a year for the past 10 years to visit and explore different areas. So we really do know the distance destination, and we're always happy to suggest places that are slightly off-piste or kind of slightly further off the beaten track. We do have really comprehensive guides and information, so I appreciate Japan can be quite overwhelming. There is a big language barrier, everything works in weird and wonderful ways, but it's quite part of the charm. But the kind of guides and information that we provide you really help to make it as easy and straightforward as possible. So even if you're not on a group tour, if you're on a tailor-made itinerary, you'll have destination guides for each area that you're visiting. So I've got some examples here which you can have a look through. So this is Hakone, which is in the Japanese Alps. So this will give you kind of suggestions of sightseeing routes, restaurant recommendations, opening and closing times for museums, things like that, to really make sure that you're able to sightsee as easily as possible. And I've got a short little video just to kind of show you what the contrast and some of the sights are that you can experience in Japan. Hopefully this has that. Hello. Such huge contrast. You've got big cities, neon lights, everything going on 24/7, all the way through to kind of really rural, peaceful shrines and temples, which makes it such an interesting place to be. You can be in Tokyo and an hour later you can be out in the countryside, which feels like a completely different world. So I think for anyone going to Japan, we always encourage them to kind of see a mix of city and countryside and get the true experience. So as a company, we're turning 25 this year, which is very exciting, and we started off selling Japan, and that's where our kind of true love is. So we spent 25 years kind of building relationships and kind of extending our knowledge of the country to make sure that we're able to kind of provide best trips and best suggestions of where to go and when to go. Lots of people think Japan, cherry blossoms. Yes, the cherry blossoms are beautiful, but also it's an incredibly busy time of year to travel. So why not go either slightly earlier or slightly later, enjoy Japan with some fewer crowds, some destinations that don't feel quite so packed. So we're really happy to make suggestions and use our expertise to make sure that you have the best trip possible. So I'm self-indulgent, so a little bit about me. So why I love Japan. So as I said, I spent 2 years living in Japan. I was teaching English to high school students there in very rural prefecture in the south of the country. But I absolutely fell in love with the country. So the first time I arrived, I have never quite experienced culture shock like it. Everything has its own sound. It's impeccably clean, and it's just kind of unlike anywhere else. It takes a moment to kind of take it all in. From every time you walk into a convenience store, each convenience store, depending on which brand it has a different jingle, and everyone's kind of yelling at you like, "Irashaimase," and you're thinking, why are you yelling at me? I'm just walking into the convenience store. But actually, they're just saying welcome. So it's all of these little quirks which make it feel like such a special destination. When I left, I was really sad to leave. I was pleased to go back home for a little bit, but you really do feel the pull of Japan wanting you to go back and visit. And for me, I always love going back and kind of going out into the rural countryside, because that's where the area that I live. So for me, I think the countryside is true Japan, and I also just love going back and eating as much as humanly possible. Because it's really difficult to have a bad meal. It doesn't mean that you're going to like everything that you eat. There are some very weird and wonderful things in Japan, but everything is kind of beautifully presented, very freshly prepared, and they really do take care in the ingredients and in the foods that they make for you. So I've got a small little pop quiz. Does anyone know how many islands there are in Japan? Feel free to throw your guess as well.
I'd say more than 6,000.
More than 6,000.
Well, I was going to say 5 until I saw you with the map, and I thought, no, all those little ones down there, that can't be right.
So somewhere between 5 and 6,000. 5 and then 6,000. Well, you're very close. So there are 6,800. For some reason, in March 2023, they discovered another 7,000 islands. I think most of these tend to be rocks floating in the sea, and they're some sort of political sea crab situation.
It wasn't the Chinese building, but yeah.
Yeah. We'll stick with kind of 6,800. I think that's a bit more realistic.
And one of them is actually has actually a certificate of merit to a fictional island in the CGI 3D Japanese movie. That's an actual fact.
Wow, Japan and its islands, full of wonders. But you don't have to memorise all 6,500 of them. That would be insane. There's just a few that you'll need to know that will kind of help shape where you want to go and what you want to see. So you've got Hokkaido, which is this island furthest north. This is kind of actually one big prefecture, which is like a county in Japan, and it's one of the most sparsely populated. Geographically, it's very close to Russia, which means that it has very high snowfall in the winter, so you do tend to go here in the winter for skiing and snowboarding, or you go in the summer for kind of beautiful hiking, beautiful scenery. But for most people, I'd say you don't tend to visit here on a first trip, it tends to be on a second or a third time trip, just because of the amount of time and distance it takes to get there. You've then got Shikoku, which is a smaller island here. So this is a really beautiful island. It's known for its kind of hidden valleys and shrines and temples, and it does tend to be kind of far less populated, again, than places like Tokyo and Kyoto, where you have very intense population density, but it means that it's really charming to visit, and you get to see kind of a much quieter, untouched aspect of Japan. But again, most people will tend to visit here on a second or a third trip, just because first time they're going, you tend to want 2 weeks. You don't have a huge amount of time to see everything and do everything. And then on your second trip, you might feel a little bit more confident and want to kind of go slightly further off-field. You then got Kyushu, which is my favourite island because it's where I lived. So I lived on this little peninsula here. And this is a beautiful island, lots of volcanic landscapes, amazing hiking, really great food, and also really interesting history. It's the island which has Nagasaki on it, and prior to World War II, Nagasaki was actually one of the only kind of international trading posts, so you have a bit more international influence within Kyushu, and it's also one of the only islands which kind of Christianity touched. So you do have lots of kind of hidden little churches across Kyushu, which makes it really interesting compared to other areas where they didn't have as much international influence. Again, we will tend to visit here on a second or a third trip, but if you are looking to combine Japan with South Korea, then this works as a really good stopping off point. You can take the ferry between Fukuoka, which is just up here, and Busan in South Korea, or it's about an hour's flight, so it's really easy to do. Then way down here are these chain of islands, which helps contribute towards 6,500. This is the Okinawan Islands, and this is known as the Hawaii of Okinawa, or the Hawaii of Japan, sorry. But I would take a pinch of salt. You do have really beautiful subtropical islands, lots of kind of interesting like flora and fauna, but it is also home to a huge number of US military bases, which takes the shine off it a little bit. And although it looks relatively close on the map, you are actually closer to the Philippines and Taiwan than you are to Tokyo. So the amount of time it can take to get there, if you're looking for like a little beach break at the end of your time in Japan, often it is a bit more worthwhile going elsewhere, just when you think about the kind of travel involved and the costs. But that being said, if you are a huge fan of karate, it's the birthplace of karate, and also has some of the oldest living humans in the world. So if you're a fan of people over 100, go to Okinawa. So this long island here is Honshu, and this is typically where you're going to spend most of your time when you visit Japan. So it's home to some of Japan's most famous kind of sites and cities. So you've got kind of Tokyo here. If you're looking at flying direct to Japan, Tokyo is going to be your only entry and exit point. It's the only place where you've got direct flights. Big sprawling metropolis. It makes London look small and quiet and calm. But that being said, you do have areas of absolute insanity within Tokyo, but there are lots of kind of quieter, more traditional areas which our kind of guides can take you to, so you can see a little bit more of what Tokyo has to offer. It's not just all neon lights and skyscrapers and madness 24/7, but each area's got its own kind of distinct characteristics and different districts to explore. So I'd normally say 3 nights at the start as a minimum will give you a good introduction of what Tokyo has to offer, and then normally 1 or 2 nights at the end before you fly back. You've then got the Mount Fuji region. It looks very close on the map to Tokyo, but it will take about 2 hours to get there by public transport. And this area is really beautiful, kind of dramatic scenery. You've of course got kind of Mount Fuji stealing the show, if they're not hiding behind a cloud. But this area is famous for hot springs and thermal baths. So normally you'd stay for 1 or 2 nights here in a traditional Japanese accommodation. So that's where you'll sleep on futon mattresses on the floor, and lots of properties will have their own hot springs, which naturally feed into the property. So it's a really nice place to kind of relax and unwind, particularly after the madness of Tokyo. I would say you're not going to be guaranteed to see Mount Fuji. It does often hide behind a cloud, so you are very lucky if you get those iconic views, and there are certain times of the year where it does tend to be a better chance of seeing Mount Fuji. The kind of winter months tend to be the clearest, whereas the summer you tend to have quite a lot of haze, so it can be a bit harder to see Fuji. You've then got Kyoto, which is about 2 hours away from the Fuji region, and this is really the cultural heart of Japan. So this is known as the city of 1,000 temples. So It's the second most visited area in Japan after Tokyo, but in terms of size, it is actually quite a small city. So it does mean it can feel quite densely packed with tourists, particularly at busy times like the cherry blossoms. But that being said, I went in December and was pleasantly surprised by how calm and quiet it was. I went to lots of the kind of most famous shrines and temples, which normally have big crowds of people, and actually got to enjoy them with very few people around me. So there are certain times of year that you can go, where you can still enjoy Kyoto without kind of some of the bigger crowds. It's a really good base for exploring the area. If you're not fans of shrines and temples, or if you don't want to spend 5 days exploring every 1,000 temple that there is lots of day trip options that you can do from Kyoto as well. So you've got Nara, which is about 45 minutes away, and you might have seen this on some of the kind of nature documentaries with the population of deer who learn to bow at you and kind of ask for crackers. I think the most recent David Attenborough Asia series had a small segment on Nara, so I definitely recommend to watch that. And then you've also got places like Osaka, which is the food capital of Japan, again about an hour away by public transport. So it's a really nice little base to make sure that you're not on the move every other day, and that you can kind of use that as a base and take your day trips further afield. About 90 minutes from Kyoto is Hiroshima. I actually would really recommend for you to go to Hiroshima. Often there can be a bit of apprehension because of its involvement or its kind of history regarding the atomic bomb, but it's a really beautiful cosmopolitan city, and the Peace Memorial Park is sobering, but I think it's very worthwhile to visit. And then the city itself is very nice and compact, easy to explore. And you're also very close to a small island called Miyajima, so you can take a ferry across to Miyajima, which is a really nice opportunity to see some of the sea, and also to visit one of the many islands in Japan. Because I think often you do spend a lot of time visiting the cities, and you don't tend to see a huge amount of land, a huge amount of water, despite being kind of on an island. Whereas Miyajima is really beautiful, really picturesque. You've got a floating shrine gate, which you may have seen in some images, which looks like it's floating in the water when the tide comes in. So it's a really nice little day trip option from Hiroshima. I'd say these 4 destinations tend to be the most popular, particularly if you've never been to Japan before. And then there's lots of different places which you can add on and change and adapt depending on what your interests are. So you can go back up to Tokyo via the Japanese Alps, for example, or you can continue going down to Kyushu and then hop across to South Korea. But these tend to be your kind of building blocks for, say, a 2-week trip to Japan. So just a quick note on transport, as this can be one of the things that gives the most headaches when travelling around Japan. The train system is absolutely phenomenal. It puts every train we have in the UK to absolute shame, which isn't hard, I admit, but it really kind of means that travelling around the country can be such an enjoyable experience, particularly if you've had your route nicely planned, if you're not doing any kind of overly complicated journeys. Just to give you an idea of how extensive the train network is, so this is just the bullet train, which is the high-speed train network. So you can see it goes all the way from kind of Hokkaido all the way down to the tip of Kyushu. So it is very easy to travel around using the trains. I wouldn't recommend going from top to toe. It would take well over a day, but it is possible. So this is just the high-speed train network. So you've then got limited express trains, local line trains which extend all around the country. And then in the cities, you've got kind of subways which will get you easily between destinations where you need to be. So not to overwhelm you, but this is just a snapshot of what the subway looks like in Osaka. So it is very easy to get to where you need to go with the right information and the right know-how. Private transfers can be quite inexpensive in other destinations, not in Japan. So this is why, number one, the trains tend to be much faster, much more efficient, and also just much more cost effective than things like private transfers. There is a shortage of private drivers in Japan following the pandemic, so it means that the kind of availability and the costs have skyrocketed. So if you were looking to have a driver for a day around Tokyo, for example, it can cost almost £1,000, and they won't accept any reservations without a private guide as well. So it can really add to the cost of a trip. But with kind of the documentation and the information we provide, it is actually very easy to do a lot of independent sightseeing and also to travel around using the subways. Car hire is something that we've always get asked about relatively often. Driving in Japan is a novel. It's same side of the road as the UK, the cars are all automatic, and also the speed limits are very slow. But that being said, if you can take a train that's zooming through the countryside at kind of 300 kilometres an hour, but you're only allowed to drive at 50 kilometres an hour, it's going to take you a lot longer to get between A and B. But if you did want to go slightly further afield and slightly more off the beaten track, then car hire is definitely recommended. So for places like Kyushu, for example, really recommend to have a car just to give you kind of a bit more to be able to explore. So I'm going to touch on accommodations, just because again, these can be some of the things that could cause a bit of stress and a bit of confusion when travelling around Japan. So these are the 4 types of accommodations that you can opt for in Japan. So you've got Western style hotels. These tend to be kind of 3-star to 5-star options. And I would say that these are best in the cities. You're going to be out and about sightseeing a lot. You don't need to be spending a huge amount of time in your room. And even 3-star in Japan, it tends to be clean, comfortable, well located. You're not going to have all the bells and whistles, but if you're going to be out and about sightseeing all day, you just need somewhere comfortable to rest your head at the end. You've then got machiya style houses. So these are traditional Japanese townhouses which have been kind of beautifully restored, and you'll have full exclusive use of the property. They're really good for families or groups because they just give you a little bit more space than you'd have if you were in a kind of hotel room. Bearing in mind Japan's spaces at premium, so hotel rooms do tend to be on the smaller side. These are self-catered, but you're never far away from a convenience store, a restaurant, a supermarket, and also sometimes Japanese breakfast can be questionable, so it's quite nice to have a bit of time out and have a bit of flexibility. The beds here do tend to be a mix of Western style beds and futons. So you can see at the back of this image here, you've got these futons and they roll out for you to kind of sleep on the floor. So if you do have kids and you want to travel, then I would say adults take the upstairs room, kids take the futons. But it's quite a fun way to kind of have full use of the property throughout in your trip. And you can normally find these places like Kyoto and also Kanazawa. They've got apartment-style hotels, so for these again, great for families or groups. They are again self-catered, so you've got lots of amenities nearby. They tend to be a mix of Western-style beds, bunk beds and futons, depending on which room type you go for, but it's more of a service department, so you will have a reception desk, so you will have a point of contact, whereas with the self-catered machiyas, you'll just have a telephone number to ring if you need any assistance, rather than somebody kind of below you or above you. And then the 4th type of accommodation is the traditional ryokan. So this is really the best experience for rural areas. It's where you want to kind of slow things down, relax and unwind for a couple of nights. You do tend to have traditional meals included. So you'll have your Japanese breakfast and your Japanese dinner. I would say if you've got any dietary requirements, any foods you cannot eat or do not eat, this is where it's really important for us to know, just because the meals tend to be on a set menu type basis rather than a la carte, and often they're unable to make any changes or take bits out depending on what you can and can't eat. So we always ask before when you first inquire, just if you've got any dietary requirements, because that can mean the accommodation that you select in the traditional areas can be dependent on what you're able to eat. One of the best things about staying in the ryokans is the hot spring baths. So particularly in places like Kokone, where you've got natural thermal baths. Lots of the properties here will have their own gender segregated baths, or you will have your own private hot spring bath. I would recommend a private bath, just so you can have it on your balcony, not have to look anyone else in the eye naked. So it makes it a bit more of an enjoyable experience. shy Brits. And often here you will be sleeping on the futon mattresses, so similar to the Matchia houses. There are different levels of futons, so some of them are just rolled out onto the floor. Others you will have kind of a sort of slight platform, so it's a bit more raised, so it's a bit easier to get up and down. So there's lots of different varieties that you can look at. So when to travel? Japan's an all year round destination, so it is possible to travel any time of year. But I'll run through the seasons. It's the same hemisphere as the UK, so the seasons follow the same linear pattern. So you've got spring, which we're now coming into. So this is the busiest time to visit Japan. Everybody wants to go and see the cherry blossoms, which are incredible. They're very beautiful, but they do tend to only be in bloom for a 7 to 10 day window. So it can be very temperamental depending on what the climate's doing that year. Last year they were very late, the year before they were very early. This year I think they're on track for the end of March, but you never know, things can change. So it does mean that you often do pay a premium to travel over the cherry blossom period without being guaranteed to actually see them. I'd actually say if you wanted to go in spring, I would recommend going earlier. So you could go from late February into early March, so this time of year. And you'll often get the precursor to the cherry blossoms, which is the plum blossoms. And they're slightly darker in colour, and you don't have the huge crowds that you get for the cherry blossoms, so you can still enjoy spring in Japan, just without some of the bigger crowds and the bigger prices. And then spring does go through into May, which is when it does start to heat up. So I often liken May to like the Goldilocks month for Japan, because I think it's like pleasantly warm without it being too hot and humid. Everything's like beautiful and lush and green, and it's not as busy as it was a month beforehand. So I'd say if you do want to go when it's slightly warmer, then May would be a really good time to visit. You've then got the summer months, which I'm not going to lie, they're really hot and humid. If you don't like humidity, don't go to Japan in the summer. The temperatures can get to the mid-30s, but the humidity can be sort of 80%, which can feel quite oppressive. But it does have its own charms. So you've got lots of kind of summer festivals at this time of year. So lots of towns, cities, different districts will all have their own kind of regional festival, which means it's quite a fun atmosphere to be kind of in Japan for. And you do also find that this is the time of year in which there's fireworks, whereas we have them in the autumn months. So it can make it feel quite exciting, but you just have to battle the heat and maybe have a slightly slower itinerary just to make sure that you're not out and about in the heat for quite so long. In the autumn, you've got kind of beautiful autumn colours. So this is one of my favourite times of year to visit. With the summer being so hot, you do find that you don't really get the temperature coming down until sort of second week of October. So the autumn leaves tend to be at their best from end of October through to the end of November. So about 3 weeks behind the UK. But it's a really nice time of year for hiking, really nice time of year to kind of get out into some of the more rural areas and enjoy Japan. I actually went in December. I went in 3 weeks from kind of the second week of December through to Christmas. And I still found that in Kyoto and Tokyo there were autumn leaves. So even if you're going into kind of the first week of December, you might still see the autumn leaves at that time of year too. Winter's really quite underrated. It tends to be crisp and cold with blue skies, similar to today actually, which is unusual. But it's a really nice time to go because you do have fewer tourists, really nice weather for relaxing in the hot springs, and kind of if you're wanting to go into places like Hokkaido, then it's great for snow sports, and you do enjoy Japan with far fewer people. You do get some really heavy snowfall, particularly in the Alps regions, but typical temperatures don't tend to be too cold. It's like a dry cold rather than the damp cold that we get here, so it feels a little bit more pleasant. So these are just some of the things that you can experience whilst in Japan. So I've already touched on hiking. So it's best in the spring and the autumn months. There's loads of beautiful hiking options that you can do, whether it's a day hike to kind of like multi-day hike, so lots of different options depending on which region that you're going to. You've also got the very famous sumo tournament, which is actually in Japan. It's only kind of in Tokyo 3 times a year, so it's in January, May and September, and then it's in Osaka in March. It is actually coming to Royal Albert this year as well, so if you don't fancy going all the way to Japan, the tickets for Royal Albert Hall come up next week. But it's a really great experience and really great way to kind of delve in some of kind of Japan's culture. You've got food and drink. Whatever time of year you go to Japan, the food and the drink that you experience will be very different. They've got special foods to cool you down in the summer, and then things to warm you up in the winter. So you can go at 2 different times of year and experience and eat completely different things. And lots of regions have their own very, very special variations and specialities as well, depending on what they're famous for. So I touched on with the Kit Kats, you've got kind of areas famous for growing sweet potato, which have sweet potato Kit Kats. And then you've got an area in the Japanese Alps that's famous for growing wasabi, so they've got their own wasabi flavoured Kit Kats. So it's quite fun kind of finding out what the regional specialities are and kind of sampling those wherever you travel. You've got more traditional experiences as well, so you've got things like the Japanese tea ceremony, where you can learn the art of kind of brewing matcha green tea. I'd say this is best experienced somewhere like Kyoto, which is kind of a traditional hub for Japan, and you can do it on a group or a private basis. We do also have an experience where you can meet a maiko, which is an apprentice geisha, in Kyoto. It's not as sordid as memoirs of a geisha would have you believe, but it's a really nice way to kind of interact with them, learn a little bit more about kind of what their world is like, and it does feel kind of like a really special interaction. And then my favourite thing is food tours, because Japan has so much amazing food that if you read what is translated to in English, it can sound terrifying or just feel like quite disgusting. But then when you eat it, you're like, this is glorious. Why have I never had offal before, or why have I never had, like, I don't know, intestines? It's really kind of opens your doors and gives you kind of a view to try different things. So I'd say food tours are a really great way to do this. And also can help you feel a little bit more confident for days when you're on your own, or evenings where you don't have a dinner included, so you know kind of what foods to try or feel a little bit more adventurous. So continuing along the food theme, just a few different types of foods that you can try whilst you're in Japan. It's not all about sushi. I spent almost 3 weeks there in December and I had sushi once, so it's definitely possible to eat a lot more just beyond sushi or raw fish. So you've got ryokan kaiseki. So when you're staying in the traditional accommodations, they're called ryokans, and the meals that they provide are called kaiseki, and it's like a formal way of dining. So I think the easiest way to describe it is like a tasting menu. So we have lots of beautifully presented, intricate courses which tend to be based around seasons or a seasonal menu, and they're an amazing experience. I won't say you'd eat everything or want to eat everything again, but it's all part of the charm and part of the experience, and everything is beautifully presented, so it's a really nice way to kind of enjoy Japanese dining. You've then got regional specialities, so every town and city has their own specialities. So you've got takoyaki here, which is famous for Osaka. Sounds disgusting translated to English, but it's like a fried dumpling with a bit of octopus in it. Really delicious, just doesn't sound quite so nice in English. You've then got tempura, which is famous in Kyoto, and this is actually wasabi ice cream, which I had in Matsumoto, and again, far more delicious than it sounds. So everywhere that you go, you can try different things. And then going back to the trains, you've also got eki-ben. So eki is the word for train, and ben is the shortened version of bento, which is like a lunchbox. So these are train bento boxes, and every area and every town will have their own special eki-ben, which will kind of highlight and showcase their region's special foods. So I always recommend to buy one of these for a long train journey, sit on the train and enjoy kind of eating the foods of one region whilst you're travelling to another. So just another point on dietary requirements, super important to know beforehand, things like being vegetarian and being vegan aren't really that commonplace in Japan. It is starting to get a bit easier with lots more kind of vegan or vegetarian friendly restaurants opening up, but that tends to be as a result of more Western tourists visiting. So if you do have any foods that you can or can't eat, then always let us know beforehand, and it just means that we're able to kind of suggest the best possible kind of destinations or experiences for you. So I'm going to move on to some of the itineraries, just to give you an idea of what you can do within a 2-week window. And you should have a copy of the Best of Japan in your bag as well, so you can take a look at that on the way back just to get a little bit more info. So with all our trips, they are tailor-made, so we can adapt them, we can change them to suit exactly what you want to see, what you want to do. But I'd say if you've never been to Japan before, then the Best of Japan is a really good kind of foundation for exploring. So you've got the key cities of kind of Tokyo, Hakone, which is in the Mount Fuji area, Kyoto, and then Hiroshima and Miyajima. So these are what I touched on when I showed the map of destinations. I'd say definitely visit these places, particularly if you want a nice balance of city and countryside. You've then got Osaka, which is very geographically close to Kyoto, but I liken them to Kyoto being a little bit more like Bath and Osaka being a bit more like Bristol. A little bit rowdier, a little less refined, but lots of amazing food, whereas Kyoto is a little bit more prim and proper, lots more traditional aspects, and feels very different despite only being about 45 minutes away. Osaka is also home to Universal Studios, so if you do have anyone wanting to go to the kind of Mario World exhibitions or Wizarding World of Harry Potter, very bizarre experience to be in Japan and to see non-French speaking Japanese, but part of the fun anyway. Then Osaka, I would say maybe stay 2 nights just so that you can see a little bit more or go to the theme parks, but it doesn't have a huge amount for like traditional sightseeing compared to places like Kyoto or Hiroshima. We then recommend to go up to Takayama, which is in the Japanese Alps. So it's an alpine market town, so it's got really beautiful scenery with the kind of mountains in the backdrop of the mountains. They're famous for their morning markets, which is where lots of the local farmers will come and sell their kind of vegetables, local crafts and wares. So it's a really nice place to pick up some souvenirs, and if you wanted to get some like local tea or local miso paste, then this is a really nice place in which to do so. And it's also an area which is famed for its sake production. So it's a really agricultural area, and one of the byproducts of kind of rice harvesting is sake production. So there's lots and lots of breweries tucked away within Takayama, which you can go in and sample all the various different types of sake. So it's a really nice place to spend 2 days and just kind of explore a slightly smaller town within Japan, with kind of the countryside on the doorstep. This is just a building block, so there are lots of different destinations that you can add in to make it longer, or to, if you don't like the look of a certain place, if you don't want to go to Osaka, for example, then you can kind of cut it and go elsewhere. So you've got Kanazawa, which is just along here from Takayama, which is a beautiful little city, famous for gold leaf production. If you're into horticulture, I would say it's got the best Japanese garden in the country. So there's loads of different ways in which you can adapt this, but it tends to be a really good starting point from which to base your trip. Just to give you an idea on guideline prices, because it does fluctuate as it's all tailor-made and depends on exactly what you want to do, when you want to go, what you want to see. But you've got Classic, which is kind of at the 3-star level. That's from about £3,500 per person. You've got 4-star, which is kind of from about 6,300. So there does tend to be quite a big jump between the two. I'd say accommodations in Japan do tend to be more expensive than elsewhere. And also you tend to have far more experiences or activities included within that. And then 5-star can go up to kind of £12,500 per person. 5-star accommodations in Japan in peak season are painfully expensive. You can have the 4 seasons in Kyoto, for example, which will charge almost £6,000 a night. So there's quite a wide spectrum. So we're always happy to work with kind of what your requirements are, what you want to see, what you want to do, and make sure we can put together the best itinerary for you. With the accommodations, we work with lots of different accommodations throughout Japan. Lots of the more traditional, smaller properties we've had relationships with for sort of 20-25 years. So we're always happy to use our kind of expertise and knowledge to make sure that you're getting the best value, but also kind of having the best experience when you're there. But if you've got any questions about kind of itineraries or want to go through anything, let me know. Then I've got a few little tips. So I would say, please do try all the food. You might not agree with you might not like it, but at least you've tried it and experienced it. Or you might discover your new favourite food. You never know. I'd say don't worry about the language barrier. English signage has become more commonplace with the Rugby World Cup in 2019 and the Olympics, which didn't quite happen as expected in 2021. Lots of work has gone into making Japan more accessible, so there is a lot more signage in English. Japanese people do tend to be very shy and reserved, so actually often they will understand what you're saying, they don't want to get anything wrong grammatically, so they'll just pretend they don't have to respond, but actually they will understand. And sometimes some of the best interactions can just be through gesture. Do get lost in translation. It's so easy to look up everything on TripAdvisor or kind of plan every second of your day, but often some of the best things are just wandering around, finding a little cafe down the side street and having the best matcha latte you've ever had, or kind of finding yourself in a tucked away little cafe that you wouldn't have found on Google Maps. And these can often be the best experiences that you have. I would say do plan ahead. Japan does get very busy, particularly at peak times of the year to travel. So if you are looking at going in the spring or in the autumn, then I would say give yourself like a 6 to 9 month window to make sure that you are able to get kind of the best availability in terms of accommodations, guides, flights, things like that. And then finally, don't be afraid to get off the beaten track. Often the destination that you know the least about can end up being your favourite, so we're always wanting to kind of champion and recommend some of the slightly less visited areas, so it's just making sure that you're able to kind of enjoy them without having to know everything about them before you go. And then final bit for, I'll open the floor for questions, fun bit of Japan trivia. Any idea how many vending machines